The Forbidden by Clive Barker, Part 3. Trevor had come home. He did not attempt an explanation of his absence, but waited for her to cross-question him. When she failed to do so, he sank into an easy bonhomie that was worse than his expectant silence. She was dimly aware that her disinterest was probably more unsettling for him than the histrionics he had been anticipating. She couldn't have cared less. She tuned the radio to the local station and listened for the news. It came surely enough, confirming what the woman in the crowd had told her. Carrie Latimer was dead. Person or persons unknown had gained access to the house via the backyard and murdered the child while he played on the kitchen floor. A police spokesman mouthed the usual platitudes, describing Carrie's death as an unspeakable crime and the miscreant as a dangerous and deeply disturbed individual. For once, the rhetoric seemed justified, and the man's voice shook discernibly when he spoke of the scene that had confronted the officers in the kitchen of Anne-Marie's house. "Why the radio?" Trevor casually inquired, when Helen had listened for news through 3 consecutive bulletins. She saw no point in withholding her experience at Spectre Street from him. He would find out sooner or later. Coolly, she gave him a bold outline of what had happened at Butt's Court. "This Anne-Marie is the woman you first met when you went to the estate, am I right?" She nodded, hoping he wouldn't ask her too many questions. Tears were close, and she had no intention of breaking down in front of him. "So you were right," he said. "Right?" "About the place having a maniac." "No," she said, "no." "But the kid." She got up and stood at the window, looking down 2 stories into the darkened street below. Why did she feel the need to reject the conspiracy theory so urgently? Why was she now praying that Purcell had been right, and that all she had been told had been lies? She went back and back to the way Anne-Marie had been when she visited her that morning. Pale, jittery, expectant. She had been like a woman anticipating some arrival, hadn't she? Eager to shoo unwanted visitors away so that she could turn back to the business of waiting. But waiting for what? Or whom? Was it possible that Anne-Marie actually knew the murderer? Had perhaps invited him into the house? "I hope they find the bastard," she said, still watching the street. "They will," Trevor replied. "A baby murderer, for Christ's sake, they'll make it a high priority." A man appeared at the corner of the street, turned and whistled. A large Alsatian came to heel, and the 2 set off down towards the cathedral. "The dog," Helen murmured. "What?" She had forgotten the dog in all that had followed. Now the shock she'd felt, as if it had leapt at the window, shook her again. "What dog?" Trevor pressed. "I went back to the flat today where I took the pictures of the graffiti. There was a dog in there, locked in." "So?" "It'll starve. Nobody knows it's there." "How do you know it wasn't locked in to kennel it?" "It was making such a noise," she said. "Dogs bark," Trevor replied. "That's all they're good for." "No," she said very quietly, remembering the noises through the boarded window. "It didn't bark." "Forget the dog," Trevor said, "and the child. There's nothing you can do about it. You were just passing through." His words only echoed her own thoughts of earlier in the day, but somehow, for reasons that she could find no words to convey, that conviction had decayed in the last hours. She was not just passing through. Nobody ever just passed through. Experience always left its mark. Sometimes it merely scratched, on occasion it took off limbs. She did not know the extent of her present wounding, but she knew it more profound than she yet understood, and it made her afraid. "We're out of booze," she said, emptying the last dribble of whiskey into her tumbler. Trevor seemed pleased to have a reason to be accommodating. "I'll go out, shall I?" he said. "Get a bottle or two." "Sure," she replied, "if you like." He was gone only half an hour. She would have liked him to have been longer. She didn't want to talk, only to sit and think through the unease in her belly. Though Trevor had dismissed her concern for the dog, and perhaps justifiably so, she couldn't help but go back to the locked maisonette in her mind's eye, to picture again the raging face on the bedroom wall, and hear the animal's muffled growl as it pawed the boards over the window. Whatever Trevor had said, she didn't believe the place was being used as a makeshift kennel. No. The dog was imprisoned in there, no doubt of it, running round and round, driven in its desperation to eat its own feces, growing more insane with every hour that passed. She became afraid that somebody, kids maybe, looking for more tinder for their bonfire, would break into the place, ignorant of what it contained. It wasn't that she feared for the intruder's safety, but that the dog, once liberated, would come for her. It would know where she was, so her drunken head construed, and come sniffing her out. Trevor returned with the whiskey, and they drank together until the early hours. When her stomach revolted, she took refuge in the toilet. Trevor, outside, asking her if she needed anything, her telling him weakly to leave her alone. When, an hour later, she emerged, he had gone to bed. She did not join him, but lay down on the sofa and dozed through until dawn. The murder was news. The next morning it made all the tabloids as a front-page splash, and found prominent positions in the heavyweights too. There were photographs of the stricken mother being led from the house, and others, blurred but potent, taken over the backyard wall and through the open kitchen door. Was that blood on the floor or shadow? Helen did not bother to read the articles. Her aching head rebelled at the thought. But Trevor, who had brought the newspapers in, was eager to talk. She couldn't work out if this was further peacemaking on his part or a genuine interest in the issue. "The woman's in custody," he said, poring over the Daily Telegraph. It was a paper he was politically averse to, but its coverage of violent crime was notoriously detailed. The observation demanded Helen's attention, unwilling or not. "Custody?" she said. "Anne-Marie?" "Yes." "Let me see." He relinquished the paper and she glanced over the page. "Third column," Trevor prompted. She found the place, and there it was, in black and white. Anne-Marie had been taken into custody for questioning, to justify the time lapse between the estimated hour of the child's death and the time that it had been reported. Helen read the relevant sentences over again to be certain that she'd understood properly. Yes, she had. The police pathologist estimated Carrie to have died between 6 and 6:30 that morning. The murder had not been reported until 12. She read the report over a third and fourth time, but repetition did not change the horrid facts. The child had been murdered before dawn. When she had gone to the house that morning, Carrie had already been dead 4 hours. The body had been in the kitchen, a few yards down the hallway from where she had stood. And Anne-Marie had said nothing. That air of expectancy she had had about her, what had it signified? That she awaited some cue to lift the receiver and call the police? "My Christ," Helen said, and let the paper drop. "What?" "I have to go to the police." "Why?" "To tell them I went to the house," she replied. Trevor looked mystified. The baby was dead, Trevor. When I saw Anne-Marie yesterday morning, Carrie was already dead. She rang the number given in the paper for any persons offering information. And half an hour later, a police car came to pick her up. There was much that startled her in the 2 hours of interrogation that followed, not least the fact that nobody had reported her presence on the estate to the police, though she had surely been noticed. "They don't want to know," the detective told her. "You'd think a place like that would be swarming with witnesses. If it is, they're not coming forward. A crime like this..." "Is it the first?" she said. He looked at her across a chaotic desk. "First? I was told some stories about the estate murders this summer." The detective shook his head. "Not to my knowledge. There's been a spate of muggings. One woman was put in a hospital for a week or so, but no murders." She liked the detective. His eyes flattered her with their lingering, and his face with their frankness. Past caring whether she sounded foolish or not, she said, "Why do they tell lies like that about people having their eyes cut out? Terrible things." The detective scratched his long nose. "We get it too," he said. "People come in here, they confess to all kinds of crap, talk all night, some of them, about things they've done or think they've done. Give you it all in the minutest detail, and when you make a few calls, it's all invented, out of their minds. Maybe if they didn't tell you the stories, they'd actually go out and do it." The detective nodded. "Yes," he said. "God help us. You might be right at that." And the stories she'd been told, were they confessions of uncommitted crimes? Accounts of the worst imaginable, imagined to keep fiction from becoming fact? The thought chased its own tail. These terrible stories still needed a first cause, a wellspring from which they leapt. As she walked home through the busy streets, she wondered how many of her fellow citizens knew such stories. Were these inventions common currency, as Purcell had claimed? Was there a place, however small, reserved in every heart for the monstrous? "Purcell rang," Trevor told her when she got home, "to invite us out to dinner." The invitation wasn't welcome, and she made a face. "Apollinaris, remember?" he reminded her. "He said he'd take us all to dinner, if you proved him wrong." The thought of getting a dinner out of the death of Anne-Marie's infant was grotesque, and she said so. "He'll be offended if you turn him down." "I don't give a damn. I don't want dinner with Purcell." "Please," he said softly. "He can get difficult, and I want to keep him smiling just at the moment." She glanced across at him. The look he'd put on made him resemble a drenched spaniel. "Manipulative bastard," she thought, but said, "All right, I'll go, but don't expect any dancing on the tables." "We'll leave that to Archie," he said. "I told Purcell we were free tomorrow night. Is that all right with you?" "Whenever. He's booking a table for 8 o'clock. The evening papers had relegated the tragedy of baby Carrie to a few column inches on an inside page. In lieu of much fresh news, they simply described the house-to-house enquiries that were now going on at Spectre Street. Some of the later editions mentioned that Anne-Marie had been released from custody after an extended period of questioning and was now residing with friends. They also mentioned in passing that the funeral was to be the following day. Helen had not entertained any thoughts of going back to Spectre Street for the funeral when she went to bed that night, but sleep seemed to change her mind, and she woke with the decision made for her. Death had brought the estate to life. Walking through to Ruskin Court from the street, she had never seen such numbers out and about. Many were already lining the curb to watch the funeral cortege pass. and looked to have claimed their niche earlier despite the wind and the ever-present threat of rain. Some were wearing items of black clothing, a coat, a scarf, but the overall impression, despite the lowered voices and the studied frowns, was one of celebration. Children running around, untouched by reverence, occasional laughter escaping from between gossiping adults. Helen could feel an air of anticipation, which made her spirits, despite the occasion, almost buoyant. Nor was it simply the presence of so many people that reassured her. She conceded to herself, happy to be back here in Spectre Street. The quadrangles with their stunted saplings and their grey grass were more real to her than the carpeted corridors she was used to walking. The anonymous faces on the balconies and streets meant more than her colleagues at the university. In a word, she felt home. Finally, the cars appeared, moving at a snail's pace through the narrow streets. As the hearse came into view, its tiny white casket decked with flowers, a number of women in the crowd gave quiet voice to their grief. One onlooker fainted. A knot of anxious people gathered around her. Even the children were stilled now. Helen watched, dry-eyed. Tears did not come very easily to her, especially in company. As the second car containing Anne-Marie and 2 other women drew level with her, Helen saw that the bereaved mother was also eschewing any public display of grief. She seemed, indeed, to be almost elevated by the proceedings, sitting upright in the back of the car, her pallid features the source of much admiration. It was a sour thought, but Helen felt as though she was seeing Anne-Marie's finest hour. The one day in an otherwise anonymous life in which she was the center of attention. Slowly, the cortege passed by and disappeared from view. The crowd around Helen was already dispersing. She detached herself from a few mourners who still lingered at the curb and wandered through the street into Butt's Court. It was her intention to go back to the locked maisonette to see if the dog was still there. If it was, she would put her mind at rest by finding one of the estate caretakers and informing him of the fact. The quadrangle was, unlike the other courts, practically empty. Perhaps the residents, being neighbors of Anne-Marie's, had gone on to the crematorium for the service. Whatever the reason, the place was eerily deserted. Only children remained, playing around the pyramid bonfire, their voices echoing across the empty expanse of the square. She reached the maisonette and was surprised to find the door open again, as it had been the first time she'd come here. The sight of the interior made her lightheaded. How often in the past several days had she imagined standing here, gazing into that darkness? There was no sound from inside. The dog had surely run off, either that or died. There could be no harm, could there, in stepping into that place one final time, just to look at the face on the wall and its attendant slogan, "Sweets to the sweet." She had never looked up the origins of that phrase. No matter, she thought. Whatever it had stood for once, it was transformed here, as everything was, herself included. She stood in front of the front room for a few moments to allow herself time to savor the confrontation ahead. Far away behind her, the children were screeching like mad birds. She stepped over a clutter of furniture and towards the short corridor that joined living room to bedroom, still delaying the moment. Her heart was quick in her. A smile played on her lips, and there, at last, the portrait loomed, compelling as ever. She stepped back in the murky room to admire it more fully. and her heel caught on the mattress that still lay in the corner. She glanced down. The squalid bedding had been turned over to present its untorn face. Some blankets and a rag-wrapped pillow had been tossed over it. Something glistened among the folds of the uppermost blanket. She bent down to look more closely and found there a handful of sweets, chocolates, and caramels, wrapped in bright paper, and littered amongst them, neither so attractive nor so sweet, a dozen razor blades. There was blood on several. She stood up again and backed away from the mattress, and as she did so, a buzzing sound reached her ears from the next room. She turned, and the light in the bedroom diminished as a figure stepped into the gullet between her and the outside world. Silhouetted against the light, she could scarcely see the man in the doorway, but she smelt him. He smelled like candy floss, and the buzzing was with him, or in him. I just came to look, she said, at the picture. The buzzing went on, the sound of a sleepy afternoon, far from here. The man in the doorway did not move. "Oh, well," she said, "I've seen what I wanted to see." She hoped against hope that her words would prompt him to stand aside and let her pass, but he didn't move, and she couldn't find the courage to challenge him by stepping towards the door. "I have to go," she said, knowing that despite her best efforts, fear seeped through every syllable. "I'm expected." That was not entirely untrue. Tonight they were all invited to Apollinaires for dinner, but that wasn't until 8, which was 4 hours away. She would not be missed for a long while yet. "If you'll excuse me," she said. The buzzing had quietened a little, and in the hush, the man in the doorway spoke. His unaccented voice was almost as sweet as his scent. "No need to leave yet," he breathed. I'm due. Though she couldn't see his eyes, she felt them on her, and they made her feel drowsy, like that summer that sang in her head. "I came for you," he said. She repeated the 4 words in her head. "I came for you." If they were meant as a threat, they certainly weren't spoken as one. I don't know you," she said. "No," the man murmured, "but you doubted me." "Doubted?" "You weren't content with the stories, with what they wrote on the walls. So I was obliged to come." The drowsiness slowed her mind to a crawl, but she grasped the essentials of what the man was saying, that he was the legend, and she, in disbelieving him, had obliged him to show his hand. She looked now down at those hands. One of them was missing. In its place, a hook. "There will be some blame," he told her. "They will say your doubts shed innocent blood, but I say, what's blood for, if not for shedding? And in time the scrutiny will pass, the police will leave, the cameras will be pointed at some fresh horror, and they will be left alone to tell stories of the Candyman again." "Candyman?" she said. Her tongue could barely shape that blameless word. "I came for you," he murmured so softly that seduction might have been in the air. And so saying, he moved through the passageway and into the light. She knew him, without doubt. She had known him all along, in that place kept for terrors. It was the man on the wall. His portrait painter had not been a fantasist. The picture that howled over her was matched in each extraordinary particular by the man she now set eyes upon. He was bright to the point of gaudiness, his flesh a waxy yellow, his thin lips pale blue, his wild eyes glittering as if their irises were set with rubies. His jacket was a patchwork, his trousers the same. He looked, she thought, almost ridiculous, with his blood-stained motley and the hint of rouge on his jaundiced cheeks. But people were facile. They needed these shows and shams to keep their interest. Miracles, murders, demons driven out, and stones roiled from tombs. The cheap glamour did not taint the sense beneath. It was only in the natural history of the mind, the bright feathers that drew the species to mate with its secret self. And she was almost enchanted by his voice, by his colors, by the buzz from his body. She fought to resist the rapture, though. There was a monster here. Beneath this fetching display, its nest of razors was at her feet, still drenched in blood. Would it hesitate to slither her own throat if it once laid hands on her? As the Candyman reached for her, she dropped down and snatched the blankets up, flinging it at him. A rain of razors and sweetmeats fell around his shoulders. The blanket followed, blinding him. But before she could snatch the moment to slip past him, the pillow which had lain on the blanket rolled in front of her. It was not a pillow at all. Whatever the forlorn white casket she had seen in the hearse had contained, it was not the body of baby Carrie. That was here, at her feet, its blood-drained face turned up to her. He was naked. His body showed everywhere signs of the fiend's attentions. In the 2 heartbeats she took to register this last horror, the Candyman threw off the blanket. In his struggle to escape from its fold, his jacket had come unbuttoned. And she saw, though her senses protested, that the contents of his torso had rotted away, and the hollow was now occupied by a nest of bees. They swarmed in the vault of his chest and encrusted in a seething mass the remnants of flesh that hung there. He smiled at her plain repugnance. "Sweets to the sweet," he murmured, and stretched his hooked hand towards her face. She could no longer see light from the outside world, nor hear the children playing in Butt's court. There was no escape into a saner world than this. The Candyman filled her sight. Her drained limbs had no strength to hold him at bay. "Don't kill me," she breathed. "Do you believe in me?" he said. She nodded minutely. "How can I not?" she said. "Then, why do you want to live?" She didn't understand, and was afraid her ignorance would prove fatal, so she said nothing. "If you would learn," the fiend said, "just a little from me, you would not beg to live." His voice had dropped to a whisper. "I am rumour," he sang in her ear. "It's a blessed condition, believe me, to live in people's dreams, to be whispered at street corners, but not have to be. Do you understand?" Her weary body understood. Her nerves, tired of jangling, understood. The sweetness he offered was life without living, was to be dead but remembered everywhere, immortal in gossip and graffiti. "Be my victim," he said. "No," she murmured. "I won't force it upon you," he replied, the perfect gentleman. "I won't oblige you to die. But think.
kill you here if I unhook you."
He traced the path of the promised wound with his hook. It ran from groin to neck.
"Think how they would mark this place with their dog, point it out as they pass by and say, 'She died there, the woman with the green eyes.' Your death would be a parable to frighten children with. Lovers would use it as an excuse to cling closer together."
She had been right. This was a seduction.
"Was fame ever so easy?" he asked.
She shook her head. "I'd prefer to be forgotten," she replied, "than be remembered like that." He made a tiny shrug.
"What do the good know," he said, "except what the bad teach them by their excesses?"
He raised his hooked hand.
"I said I would not oblige you to die. And I'm true to my word. Allow me, though, a kiss, at least." He moved towards her. She murmured some nonsensical threat which he ignored. The buzzing in his body had risen in volume. The thought of touching his body, of the proximity of the insects, was horrid. She forced her lead-heavy arms up to keep him at bay. His lurid face eclipsed the portrait on the wall. She couldn't bring herself to touch him, and instead stepped back. The sound of the bees rose. Some, in their excitement, had crawled up his throat and were flying from his mouth. They climbed about his lips, in his hair. She begged him over and over to leave her alone, but he would not be placated. At last, she had nowhere left to retreat to. The wall was at her back. Steeling herself against the stings, she put her hands on his crawling chest and pushed. As she did so, his hand shot out and around the back of her neck, the hook nicking the flushed skin of her throat. She felt blood come. She felt certain he would open her jugular in one terrible slash. But he had given his word, and he was true to it. Aroused by this sudden activity, the bees were everywhere. She felt them moving on her, searching for morsels of wax in her ears and sugar at her lips. She made no attempt to swat them away. The hook was at her neck. If she so much as moved, it would wound her. She was trapped, as in her childhood nightmares, with every chance of escape stymied, when sleep bad brought her to such hopelessness. The demons on every side waiting to tear her limb from limb. One trick remained: to let go, to give up all ambition to life, and leave her body to the dark. Now, as the Candyman's face pressed to hers and the sound of bees blotted out even her own breath, she played that hidden hand. And as surely as in dreams, the room and the fiend were painted out and gone. She woke from brightness into dark. There were several panicked moments when she couldn't think of where she was, then several more when she remembered. But there was no pain about her body. She put her hand to her neck. It was barring the nick of the hook, untouched. She was lying on the mattress, she realized. Had she been assaulted as she lay in a faint? Gingerly she investigated her body. She was not bleeding. Her clothes were not disturbed. The Candyman had, it seemed, simply claimed his kiss. She sat up. There was precious little light through the boarded window, and none from the front door. Perhaps it was closed, she reasoned, but no. Even now, she heard somebody whispering on the threshold. A woman's voice. She didn't move. They were crazy, these people. They had known all along what her presence in Butt's court had summoned, and they had protected him, this honeyed psychopath, given him a bed and an offering of bonbons, hidden him away from prying eyes, and kept their silence when he brought blood to their doorsteps. Even Anne-Marie, dry-eyed in the hallway of her house, knowing that her child was dead a few yards away. The child! That was the evidence she needed. Somehow they had conspired to get the body from the casket. What had they substituted? A dead dog? And brought it here, to the Candyman's tabernacle, as a toy or a lover. She would take baby Carrie with her to the police and tell the whole story. Whatever they believed of it, and that would probably be very little. The fact of the child's body was incontestable. That way at least some of the crazies would suffer for their conspiracy, suffer for her suffering. The whispering at the door had stopped. Now, somebody was moving towards the bedroom. They didn't bring a light with them. Helen made herself small, hoping she might escape detection. A figure appeared in the doorway. The gloom was too impenetrable for her to make out more than a slim figure, who bent down and picked up a bundle on the floor. A fall of blonde hair identified the newcomer as Anne-Marie. The bundle she was picking up was undoubtedly Carrie's corpse. Without looking in Helen's direction, the mother about turned and made her way out of the bedroom. Helen listened as the footsteps receded across the living room. Swiftly she got to her feet and crossed to the passageway. From there she could vaguely see Anne-Marie's outline in the doorway of the maisonette. No lights burned in the quadrangle beyond. The woman disappeared, and Helen followed as speedily as she could, eyes fixed on the door ahead. She stumbled once and once again, but reached the door in time to see Anne-Marie's vague form in the night ahead. She stepped out of the maisonette and into the open air. It was chilly. There were no stars. All the lights on the balconies and corridors were out, nor did any burn in the flats. Not even the glow of a television. Butt's court was deserted. She hesitated before going in pursuit of the girl. Why didn't she slip away now? Cowardice coaxed her and find her way back to the car. But if she did that, the conspirators would have time to conceal the child's body. When she got back here with the police, there would be sealed lips and shrugs, and she would be told she had imagined the corpse and the Candyman. All the terror she had tasted would recede into rumour again, into words on a wall. And every day she lived from now on, she would loathe herself for not going in pursuit of sanity. She followed. Anne-Marie was not making her way around the quadrangle, but moving towards the center of the lawn in the middle of the court, to the bonfire. Yes, to the bonfire. It loomed in front of Helen now, blacker than the night sky. She could just make out Anne-Marie's figure, moving to the edge of the piled timbers and furniture and ducking to climb into its heart. This was how they planned to remove the evidence. To bury the child was not certain enough, but to cremate it and pound the bones. Who would ever know? She stood a dozen yards from the pyramid and watched as Anne-Marie climbed out again and moved away, folding her figure into the darkness. Quickly, Helen moved through the long grass and located the narrow space in amongst the piled timbers into which Anne-Marie had put the body. She thought she could see the pale form. It had been laid in a hollow. She couldn't reach it, however. Thanking God that she was as slim as the mother, she squeezed through the narrow aperture. Her dress snagged on a nail as she did so. She turned round to disengage it, fingers trembling. When she turned back, she had lost sight of the corpse. She fumbled blindly ahead.
her hands finding wood and rags in what felt like the back of an old armchair. But not the cold skin of the child. She had hardened herself against contact with the body. She had endured worse in the last hours than picking up a dead baby. Determined not to be defeated, she advanced a little further. Her shins scraped, and her fingers spiked with splinters. Flashes of light were appearing at the corners of her aching eyes. Her blood whined in her ears. But there! The body was no more than 1.5 yards ahead of her. She ducked down to reach beneath a beam of wood, but her fingers missed the forlorn bundle by millimeters. She stretched further, the whine in her head increasing, but still, she could not reach the child. All she could do was bend double and squeeze into the hidey hole the children had left in the center of the bonfire. It was difficult to get through. The space was so small. She could barely crawl on hands and knees, but she made it. The child lay face down. She fought back the remnants of squeamishness and went to pick it up. As she did so, something landed on her arm. The shock startled her. She almost cried out, but swallowed the urge and brushed the irritation away. It buzzed as it rose from her skin. The whine she had heard in her ears was not her blood, but the hive. "I knew you'd come," the voice behind her said, and a wide hand covered her face. She fell backwards, and the Candyman embraced her. "We have to go," he said in her ear, as flickering light spilled between the stacked timbers. "Be on our way, you and I." She fought to be free of him, to cry out for them not to light the bonfire, but he held her lovingly close. The light grew, warmth came with it, and through the kindling and the first flame she could see figures approaching the pyre out of the darkness of Butt's Court. They had been there all along, waiting. The lights turned out in their homes and broken all along the corridors, their final conspiracy. The bonfire caught with a will, but by some trick of its construction, the flames did not invade her hiding place quickly, nor did the smoke creep through the furniture to choke her. She was able to watch how the children's faces gleamed, how the parents called them from going too close, and how they disobeyed. How the old women, their blood thin, warmed their hands and smiled into the flames. Presently the roar and the crackle became deafening, and the Candyman let her scream herself hoarse in the certain knowledge that nobody could hear her, and even if they had, would not have moved to claim her from the fire. The bees vacated the fiend's belly as the air became hotter, and mazed the air with their panicked flight. Some attempting escape caught fire and fell like tiny meteors to the ground. The body of baby Carrie, which lay close to the creeping flames, began to cook. Its downy hair smoked, its back blistered. Soon the heat crept down Helen's throat and scorched her pleas away. She sank back, exhausted, into the Candyman's arms, resigned to his triumph. In moments they would be on their way as he had promised, and there was no help for it. Perhaps they would remember her, as he had said they might, finding her cracked skull in tomorrow's ashes. Perhaps she might become, in time, a story with which to frighten children. She had lied, saying she preferred death to such questionable fame. She did not. As to her seducer, he laughed as the conflagration sniffed them out. There was no permanence for him in this night's death. His deeds were on 100 walls and 10,000 lips. And should he be doubted again, his congregation could summon him with sweetness. He had reason to laugh. So as the flames crept upon them, did she, as through the fire, she caught sight of a familiar face, moving between the onlookers. It was Trevor. He had forsaken his meal at Apollinaires and come looking for her. She watched him,
questioning this fire watcher and that, but they shook their heads, all the while staring at the pyre with smiles buried in their eyes. Poor dupe, she thought, following his antics. She willed him to look past the flames in the hope that he might see her burning, not so that he could save her from death. She was long past hope of that, but because she pitied him in his bewilderment and wanted to give him, though he would not have thanked her for it, something to be haunted by. That, and a story to tell.